I pulled onto my own farm road after being away for months and found a strange SUV parked by my barn, lights on in the farmhouse, and a woman standing on my porch screaming into her phone that the owner is trespassing. Then she called the cops on me from my front steps, on land she'd apparently been squatting on for years. I inherited the farm from my uncle about 7 years ago, and if you've never inherited rural property, let me explain something right away. It's never just a house with land. It's fences, easements, tax maps, old equipment, half-buried history, and at least 3 problems nobody mentions until after the paperwork is done. My uncle's place sat about 40 minutes outside town, roughly 80 acres of mixed pasture, woods, and low rolling fields, with an old farmhouse near the front, a machine shed, 2 barns, and a pond that was either beautiful or mosquito terrorism, depending on the season. It wasn't a working commercial farm anymore by the time I got it. Mostly I leased part of the acreage seasonally to a neighboring cattle guy, kept the rest maintained, and used the property as a quiet escape whenever I needed to disappear from city life for a while. Because of work, I wasn't there every week. Sometimes I'd go out twice in a month. Sometimes I wouldn't make it for 6 or 8 weeks if things got busy. But the place was mine, it was paid off, and I kept it secured well enough that I never worried too much. Or at least I didn't until I started noticing little things. The first clue came about 3 years after I inherited it. I drove out on a random Sunday and found fresh tire tracks by the machine shed that definitely weren't mine and definitely weren't from the cattle lease neighbor, because his trucks leave mud like they're trying to plant tires. These were cleaner, passenger vehicle, maybe SUV. I checked the farmhouse, locked. Barns looked fine, nothing obviously missing. I chalked it up to somebody turning around or local kids being nosy and moved on. Then it happened again. Different time. Same kind of tracks. Once I found an empty grocery sack in the trash barrel beside the back porch. Another time, the side gate near the pond had been wired shut differently than I left it. None of it was enough to scream emergency, but all of it together made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So I did what any sane landowner with rural property should do. I installed cameras, not a flashy whole compound security system, just enough coverage to catch movement near the farmhouse, barns, front gate, and the long gravel drive. Solar-powered, motion-triggered, cloud-backed up, quiet, reliable, and then nothing. For months, almost nothing. A few deer, a raccoon with main character energy, one coyote that looked offended by the weather. I started wondering if I'd overreacted. Then work got ugly for a while and I stopped checking the camera feed as often as I should have. That turned out to be the only real mistake I made. I had originally planned to head out to the farm the second weekend in October for a few days, clean gutters, check fencing, maybe sit by the pond and remember what silence sounds like. But a project I was managing wrapped early, and I suddenly found myself free on a Thursday afternoon. So I loaded up some supplies, pointed my truck toward the county line, and decided to surprise absolutely nobody. Except, as it turned out, the woman who had apparently been living on my property like she'd won it in a divorce settlement from reality. I knew something was wrong before I even reached the house. About halfway down the drive, I saw a dark SUV parked off to the side near the barn. Not abandoned, recently used, clean. A folding chair sat outside the machine shed. There were 2 plastic totes stacked by the porch steps. And as I rounded the last bend, I saw lights on in the farmhouse. Not one light, multiple. Kitchen, living room, porch lamp. I actually slowed to a crawl because my brain was trying to reject the image in front of me. Then the front door opened and out stepped a woman in leggings, house slippers, and the kind of instant outrage only possible when someone's private delusion gets interrupted. She looked at my truck like I was a home invasion with bad timing. "Can I help you?" she yelled from the porch. I actually laughed. Not to be rude, well, maybe a little, but because there's a very specific kind of absurdity that short-circuits normal responses. "Yeah," I said, rolling the window down. "You can start by telling me why you're standing on my porch." That landed badly. Her face tightened immediately. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "This is private property." I said, "Exactly." Then I stepped out of the truck. That's when she made the funniest mistake of her entire squatting career. She pulled out her phone and said, "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." I said, "Great, saves me a step." She didn't like that answer. She started pacing on the porch, phone already dialing, narrating to dispatch loud enough for me to hear. "Yes, there's a man here trespassing on my property. He just pulled up and is refusing to leave." My property. To dispatch. While standing in front of the farmhouse I paid taxes on. I should probably mention here that I'm not a particularly dramatic person. I don't yell much, I don't posture, I especially don't argue with people who are actively recording themselves making bad legal choices. So while she performed her little porch theater 911 call, I just took out my own phone, opened my county parcel records app, and started pulling up the deed, tax history, and utility account information. Then I walked over to the mailbox post and stood there, where the house number was clearly visible on camera and on dispatch if they cared to verify it. She kept going. "He's threatening me," she added at one point, which was interesting considering the most aggressive thing I had done so far was stand still with good posture. I told her calmly, "You are on private property owned by me. I have proof. You should think very carefully about what you say next." She responded with the line every delusional squatter eventually reaches for, "I've been here for years." And there it was. The whole thing cracked open in one sentence. Years, not weeks, not, "My cousin let me stay." Years. Suddenly every weird camera gap, every moved gate, every unexplained trash bag, every tire track snapped into place like a police corkboard in a procedural drama. She hadn't just wandered in recently. She had slowly occupied the place during the windows when I wasn't there, gradually convincing herself that lack of interruption meant entitlement. And if you've never dealt with that kind of person, here's the core problem. They mistake inconvenience for abandonment. If you're not physically present enough to inconvenience their fantasy, they start writing themselves a lease in their head. The deputies arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 units. Good county guys, calm, alert, not immediately buying anybody's performance. The woman, her name, I would learn, was Trina, did exactly what people like Trina always do when actual authority shows up. She got louder. She marched right up to the first deputy and launched into a breathless speech about how she had occupied and maintained the farmhouse for years, how the owner hadn't been around, how she had established residence, and how I was harassing a lawful occupant. I stayed quiet until one of the deputies asked me directly, "Sir, what's your relationship to the property?" I handed him my ID, the deed on my phone, tax records, utility bills, insurance declarations, and the most recent county assessment notice. I also showed him the trail camera system account, under my name, and the lease paperwork for the neighboring pasture arrangement. He looked through it all, then looked at the house, then looked at her, and I could practically hear the internal translation happening. "Oh, this is not a misunderstanding. This is an idiot with furniture." To their credit, the deputies didn't rush. Rural property occupancy gets messy fast if you don't handle it cleanly, and they knew it. So they separated us and started asking questions. That's when things got even better. Trina's story changed every 7 minutes. First, she said she had verbal permission from the old owner. Problem there. My uncle had been dead for years before her timeline supposedly began. Then she said she'd been caretaking the place for me. I asked which of my names she had been caretaking it for since we had never met. Then she pivoted to adverse possession, which is one of those magic words internet squatters love because they think saying it out loud transforms trespass into a legal TED Talk. The deputy actually asked her how she had been paying taxes on the property if she believed she had any claim to it. Silence, then muttering, then accusations that I was bullying her. Meanwhile, I walked one deputy through the obvious physical signs: new curtains in the windows, a chest freezer in my mudroom, bags of dog food by my back steps despite the fact I do not own a dog. A key safe screwed into the side of my porch railing that definitely hadn't been there the last time I checked. Inside the house, once the deputy asked if I consented to entering my own home to verify occupancy, things got truly surreal. My uncle's old den had been turned into some kind of discount farmhouse influencer cave. There were throw blankets on my sofa, a ring light in the corner, a whiteboard calendar on my kitchen wall with handwritten reminders like Costco, book club, and lake weekend. My guest room had become storage. My pantry had groceries. My bathroom had expensive shampoo. The woman had not been camping in my farmhouse. She had moved in and started curating a life there like she was one mason jar away from monetizing it. The deputies kept things professional, but I could tell they were getting increasingly less enchanted by her interpretation of reality. Then came the line that really ended her. One deputy asked how she got electricity and water in her name if she was a lawful resident. She said, "I never transferred it because he wasn't using it anyway." That was it. That was the bridge from messy civil weirdness into very clean criminal stupidity. Because now we weren't just talking about unauthorized occupancy. We were talking about knowingly occupying a home while intentionally using services under someone else's name without permission. Add in the false 911 trespass claim, the changing stories, the unauthorized entry, and suddenly her, "I've been here for years," confidence started looking a lot more like a booking photo in waiting. They asked her if she had any written lease, permission, or communication with me or my uncle. She did not. They asked if she had mail address there. She did, actually, which only made things funnier because it turned out she had been forwarding packages and a few subscriptions to my farm address while still keeping a separate legal mailing address in town. So no, this was not some desperate woman with nowhere to go who had quietly fallen through the cracks. This was a full-grown opportunist who found an intermittently used rural property and decided to turn it into a free lifestyle. And because people like that always overplay the hand, she called the cops on the owner like she was filing a customer service complaint. The deputies ended up removing her that day. She cried, she yelled, she accused me of ruining her stability, which was rich coming from someone standing in my kitchen with my cereal. I kept my mouth shut and let the process work. They let her collect essentials under supervision, but not before documenting the occupancy and taking statements. She asked if she could come back later for the rest. I said, through an attorney, if necessary. That got me a dirty look from one deputy, but not because I was wrong, just because he knew exactly how many boxes and emotional support candles were about to become my problem. Once she was gone, I started the miserable part, inventory. And let me tell you, there is no more depressing archaeological experience than cataloging what a stranger has done to a house full of your family's history. She hadn't destroyed the place exactly, but she had colonized it. My uncle's old workshop drawers were full of craft junk and unopened Amazon returns. The back mudroom had become dog storage and off-season decor. She had mounted cheap shelving in the laundry room and painted over one of the spare bedroom walls with some awful beige influencer color called something like oat milk surrender. I found old framed family photos wrapped in towels in a closet because apparently they didn't fit her aesthetic. That part made me angrier than anything else. Not the groceries, not the audacity, the casual way she had treated someone else's history like clutter in the path of her squatter's Pinterest board. Over the next week, things got even more absurd. She posted in a local Facebook group claiming I had forcibly displaced a woman from her established farm residence. That didn't go well for her once a couple of locals recognized the property, and one of the deputy's wives, apparently a silent menace with Wi-Fi, dropped a beautifully vague comment about ownership records being public. Then came the cherry on top. I had my attorney send a demand letter for damages, unauthorized use, and remediation costs. Not because I thought she'd suddenly write me a check with an apology note, but because I wanted every single thing about her fantasy occupancy converted into the correct adult category, liability. Since then, I've tightened everything. New locks, better gates, more cameras, remote monitoring that I actually check. The farmhouse is mine again, and honestly, it feels cleaner now, not because the throw pillows are gone, but because the weird psychic stain of someone else's entitlement finally got washed out of the walls. Every once in a while, I still think about that first moment when I pulled up and she asked, "Can I help you?" from my own porch, and I smile. Because if you're going to illegally squat on someone's farm for years, maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't call the cops when the owner gets home early. So tell me, if you came back to your own farm and found a squatter calling the cops on you, what would you have done? Drop your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more entitled people stories, property revenge, and satisfying real-life drama.